I shot this video on the 20th of October. It's about 7:30 in the morning. You can see the fog laying off in the distance. They started cutting these beans last night after dark. I didn't come in and try to video them then. There was no wind blowing and it was so dusty I wouldn't have been able to saw anything anyway. So they've got their equipment setting up on this hill, and nobody's showed up yet. I mean, it's early, so they know it's damp. They can't start cutting right away anyway, so there's no big hurry. When I start videoing here later, we'll be seeing them cut this hillside here, and it's terraced. You can see the terraces running left and right. All of the crop ground you see in this video is Dale Farms. And by the time they quit Friday night, 90% at least of all of the stuff you're going to see in this pan, they cut. So they cover a lot of ground. Here, one of their terrace tiles is plugged up for some reason, so they'll be in there next year digging that up, try to find out why it's ponding water. It's a beautiful morning. It was quiet out there, no breeze. Beautiful morning, but it's just damp. You grab a handful of beanstalk and twist it in your hand, you can feel the moisture in it. So cutting beans, you don't get a very early start generally, and then how late you run is just dependent on when the dew falls or how heavy the dew is. And then there's some variation whether you're cutting up on hill ground or whether you're down in a bottom. So the length of the day that they're going to put in today is totally dependent on the dew this evening, when that stops them, and then how fast we can get rid of this moisture this morning. It's supposed to be an extremely windy day, but right now there's no wind at all. Cutting beans, they don't have to move as much product, so they can keep up with these 4 combines with just 2 grain buggies. Clear over in the distance, that white set of buildings, that's the west boundary of this chunk of land, and they own all of this in here. And this picture is looking back toward the south where I just came from with the drone down into the bottom. So they started showing up a little bit after 8 o'clock. They've got a fuel trailer here, that white dually that you can see in the picture. It's got a fuel trailer hooked onto it. Everybody's kind of getting around and servicing their equipment. Nobody's in a real big hurry because it's too wet. But they know pretty soon the wind's going to start blowing and they'll get started. When they're shelling corn, especially, there's more vehicles involved, more tractors involved, a 3rd grain cart. The fuel guy, he keeps busy all day, especially if they're a long ways from their home base, which here they're not. They're just about 2 miles from their storage tank. That trailer hauls fuel and oils of different types. Uses a gas engine pump. Cutting beans is a dusty business. So they're pulling all the air filters out of the combines and they'll blow them out. I said one of the combines last night was having a power problem, and once they pulled the filters out, they could see why. The filters were almost plugged. And again, they was running and no wind in that bottom, and it was just running, eating that dust all the time. You can still see a little bit of fog clear down there in the bottom. So those beans will be the last to dry out enough. This hill will dry out first. So when they do start up, they'll cut here on the hill and wait for that bottom to dry. Pretty relaxed right now because they know they can't work anyway, so they're just kind of taking their time. I don't remember exactly what time it was when they finally got started. I would say it was probably 9:30 or somewhere around there. Now you can see the wind's blowing and it's dried the beans out. You can see how the dust is fogging out of the combine. So now everybody's moving now. These combines use a Draper style head. They don't use an auger to move their material. They use conveyors. And there's 2 conveyors that move it laterally, one from each side, moves it toward the center. And then there's a conveyor in the center that takes it into the throat of the combine. And the design is to cut that beanstalk off and lay it on that apron and let that apron move it to the center of the combine and then take it inside, top of the plant first, stump of the plant last. And if you notice that it don't destroy that plant at all, it lays them on that conveyor and runs them in there. And the idea is you don't shock the plant and shake it and knock any beans out of the pod. The old style augers, you were grinding your material all the time trying to slide it to the center. The material's just laying on top of the apron. So once that plant goes inside the combine, it's still intact. And here's even a better shot of how that works. You see how it's just laying that plant on the apron and just sliding it over to the center and then taking it inside. They've changed the style of heads dramatically. These heads will flex and let them cut over terraces, which you're going to see here in a little bit. And here again, there's that terrace that's the tiles plugged. So you kind of got to space these terraces. When they build them, they try to space them so they'll fit their combines. And now for the next few pictures here, you're going to see sometimes the head's not taking a full cut. Well, he's paying attention to the end of the head that's up on top of the terrace or that's in the valley of the terrace, and he's trying to run there so the head don't have to try to bend over the top of the terrace or try to sag into the valley. So he might not be taking a full cut all the time. And here you can see why this area needs terraces. You can see this ditch he's crossing now that's above that top terrace. If they didn't have terraces in here, the ditches would be so deep you couldn't cross it. And again, you can see the wind's really starting to pick up now. And this combine coming behind him, like I was talking about before with that terrace, he made his cut into there based on where the terrace is. So if you got the terraces spaced right, you have very little point row. It's full cuts all the time. But sometimes you just can't get them spaced exactly right, and you will end up with an odd-sized cut when you're finishing. These beans up here on the hill, I don't know. I'm not an expert. They're 30 bushel to the acre, 40 I'd say at the most. The beans down in the bottom will be probably twice that. It's just thinner ground up here on the hill. There you can see them conveyors all running on that head, so it gives you an idea how that works. Terraces are just a necessity in ground like this. You just can't escape it. But when it comes to harvest, it slows you down a little bit because you're having to deal with that terrace and having to make your cuts accordingly. And you can see that combine up there by that plugged terrace. He's got to cut around that. And if you look at the cutter on the head, occasionally when they're coming right at me on those terraces, you can see why they call them a Draper head. You can see the head is actually, the cutting bar is actually hanging down over, draping down over the terrace. And these, I didn't ask, I think these are 35-foot heads. And you can see how his cutter's sagged at the ends. It's high in the middle. And here, if you look on the back of this combine, you'll see a light flash, and then it flashed 3 or 4 times and then stop. He's also got 2 lights up on the front corners of his cab that do the same thing on top of it. And that's signaling the grain buggy that he is about to have a hopper full. So if the grain buggy is where he can pay attention to that and see those combines, it gives him a heads up. So if he's quite a ways off, he can start heading over there. He knows he's going to have to dump him pretty soon. And running in these terraces, they don't even try to dump on the go. They'll stop and dump. So this one, you can see those lights flash on top of his cab. He knows he's got to dump. He can't cut his way back through. So he's sticking his auger out and waiting on the buggy to get there. And again, if they were down there in that flat bottom, they would have dumped him on the go like they do with their corn when they're in straight rows. But here they just can't do that with the terraces. And you can see off in the distance the fog's lifting down in the bottom. So by the time they get this hill done, they'll be able to move down in there. And by now the wind's blowing 15 to 20 miles an hour. It's supposed to peak around 30 miles an hour. I don't know how a drone does it, but you don't see any wavering at all, and that drone is struggling trying to hold itself there. Up on this hillside, they don't have anything blocking that wind. And again, here he's finishing up. This is the last pass up here in these terraces. And you can see that this terrace is just not spaced quite right. So he's going to end up with a thin cut to finish. And you can also see his head is trying to drape over the terrace and trying to stay down on the ground, but it just can't. There's too much variation in the ground there. So the end of the head is cutting high. And he'll clean that up when he comes back and makes that final pass. They call this farming area the Tuggle Bottoms. There used to be a set of buildings up here on top of the hill where their semis parked, and that was Floyd Tuggle lived there.